G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. Welcome everyone. Today I'm interviewing Becky Paroz from Queen Bee Project Systems based in beautiful Brisbane, Australia. Thanks for your time today, Becky.
Thanks for having me on the show, Troy.
Let's start with how we know each other. So I think you reached out on Podmatch, a platform that helps guests find other good podcasts to go on and vice versa.
I think so. Somehow we connected through there and our profiles seem to coincide nicely. So yeah, here we are.
Tell our audience a bit about your business, what it does and how it makes money.
So I run a consultancy business. I've worked 30 years in engineering and construction. I'm an engineer, project manager, quality assurance expert, and done a few other things in my time. So, there's a lot of freedom in consultancy. There's a lot of extra effort too, as anyone who runs their own business knows. And I've worked a lot of major projects. We're talking $1.4 billion, $500 million to $980 million. And what I found, particularly through my exposure through QA, is that a lot of the smaller subcontractors and smaller businesses really struggle with systems. They struggle with compliance and safety, QA, and understanding why that's important. And anyone in construction knows it kind of, the problems roll downhill. So they might start at the top, but they end up at the lowest point they could roll to, which is usually sort of your mom and pop businesses and your small subcontracting specialist businesses. So I started my company with a view to go in and sort of help those guys and help them with systems and be sort of an on-call support and business coach and business development. So they didn't have to have the full cost of a person like me with my experience as well. I think everyone knows at the moment with the tradie crisis and the materials crisis and everything like that, there's not a lot of money being thrown around for that sort of role, which is unfortunate because now's the time when they actually need that sort of advice to make good choices.
Absolutely.
And so I kind of, I got started in business development and coaching back in the 99, 2000. I was working for a company. They had 2 full-time engineers in the office and 2 site supervisors and then the crews. And so it was a very small company. It was very much in its infancy. I think it had been running maybe a year and a half, 2 years. And one of the engineers in the office was going on a 6 to 8 week holiday. So they wanted to backfill his role. And I took it on. I always liked to, do some interesting stuff. I was single back then, so I didn't have commitments to worry too much about bills or long term. Anyway, after I came back, there was a discussion and they kind of realised they could probably do with someone like me who was sort of an all-rounder. So not just office admin, but procurement, reporting, accounting. So I ended up as I can't remember what I called myself, but, the commercial manager. Yeah. So it's doing everything but sort of running the jobs on site, and it left those guys free to actually do that. And that was probably my first real business development role in terms of they had no systems. They weren't doing anything consistently. These are engineers and they were very firmly engineers in their history, whereas I had a variety of roles in reporting and cost controlling and all the sort of skills they were missing. So it was a great complement, the way we worked. And so that role, after about a year and a half, possibly a little bit, a couple of months longer, we had gone from billing about 70,000 a month in the few tenders that they were doing to being able to bill 10 million.
Holy
We'd expanded
10 million a month.
10 million a month. Yes.
Shit. Right.
We're talking 20 something years ago, 2000, so 22, 23 years ago. So we were in a big boom period. The highway down the Gold Coast was expanding, so there are a lot of areas opening up between them that used to be sort of desolate wasteland. And so subdivisions were just cracking off. Forest Lake, which was an innovation when it first started in the sort of mid-90s, was still expanding. Now that place has been built out forever. And so we were involved in that. So there was a lot there was a lot to be had, but also too, it kind of again sort of reminded me of the power of systems. And once you do something consistently, you actually have so much more time freed up to actually do more. So it was a combination of them being out on site and being able to manage more because they weren't trying to do all the admin and business management. But also too, we're doing things consistently. So there wasn't losses. There wasn't trying to remember where they put this or where that was filed or if this guy had been paid. And so that all combined was able to, we incrementally, I think it was about every 6 months, sort of doubled. And that's how we got to that 10 million sort of very, very quickly. And I didn't even realize this. It was actually one of our very close subcontractors, suppliers. The general manager at the time that I had a lot to do with through the procurement process, who actually was like, what was this place turning over when you first started? I'm like, don't like to talk figures. He's like, no, just you think of that and then think about what it is now. And I just want you to know that you did that. Those guys didn't do it.
Yep.
Excuse me. And that kind of, stopped me in my tracks and kind of made me realize, again, power of systems, consistency, the drive, the amount of hours I'd done. And all those sorts of things too, because they didn't actually get me an admin assistant for the first 6 months. So I was doing a lot of hours and a lot of stuff to get them consistent. And, there's a few midnight hours of that. Well, you've got to get the bill in on time. You've got to finish that monthly report. Otherwise, you don't get paid. And, they were young guys, so they were quite happy to leave me with it and go home to wives and girlfriends, which they had. And being single at the time, I suppose it didn't really matter. It wasn't until someone pointed out how much I'd done that I was like, actually, I gave quite a bit to that company.
Yep.
And they profited from it, which is great. And great for my experience and, my sales pitch going forward. But it was an interesting time.
What year was that and how old were you then?
So that was 99, 2000, around then. And how old was I? 27?
Yep.
27, 28, yeah.
How long did it take to go from 70,000 a month to 10 million a month?
It was between 18 months and 2 years, somewhere in there, which I know sounds really unbelievable, but there was just so much work around. And these guys also too, like anyone who works in engineering kind of knows it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Yeah.
And so these guys have gone to uni with a lot of people who are now working in Lendlease and some of the bigger companies.
Yep.
So there was a lot of opportunity to get in on tenders. Tenders are very different these days in terms of some of the restrictions and the levels you've got to be. See, none of that existed back then. Where the Workplace Health and Safety Act was in its infancy.
Yep.
The idea of kind of, what do I call it? Not buying tenders and things like that. Don't graft. That was only just starting to become something that was being looked at in the industry. And so, whining and dining and golf days and all that sort of thing got you a long way back then, because that's how the industry was run up until some of the regulations started coming in. And so they were very well placed sort of on that cusp of, non-regulatory, but cleaning up to actually, take really good advantage of the environment and, the significant growth that the Southeast Corridor was experiencing back then.
Well, fast forward to now, there's a construction crisis going on, a lot of big companies going under, and small and medium-sized builders and construction companies as well.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that, I think, comes down to, I used to chair the biggest bricklaying firm here in Tasmania, about 140 team members, but seeing that they got their shit together some years ago, got some good advisors in, helped them get their systems and their reporting and their forecasting, importantly, they're great, they're fine. But I think a lot of these other construction companies that have gone under, whether they're small or large, have taken their eye off the ball when it comes to forecasting. Obviously, there's some of the issues at the moment with supply chain and costs going up, etc., as well. But in construction, I'm in awe. I've heard stories. A mate up north in Launceston had some massive renovations done on his house and got one of the best builders in the town to do it, but they never sent him a deposit invoice. He didn't get his first invoice until 6 months after the job had started. And I just can't understand how a business like that can stay in business with, cash flow is king.
Absolutely. You're correct. And that's where a lot of them are falling down. a lot of them, unfortunately, have been locked into fixed price from pre-COVID, and then add, a lot of people don't realise we've had flooding, we've had bushfires, and we've had COVID. It's a perfect storm of conditions. So there's no timber in Australia because all that got destroyed during our bushfires just before COVID hit. My husband was on the Snowy Rivers, Snowy 2 scheme down in the Snowy Mountains, and that fire went. Sorry, for
the international audience, that's the big.
Yeah. It's the second biggest hydro project we've undertaken. It's expansion of the first hydro project we did. That bushfire went through that site, and then 1 month later, COVID hit Australia. They didn't even have time to recover, and I'm sure, and this is just one example. Put that across Australia. They didn't have time to recover from the bushfire before COVID hit, and then they've had to scramble to manage that. So everybody's experiencing catch up from back then, let alone then all the lockdowns, the regulation, and the restrictions. Then we have trade issues, all the shipping issues with stuff not getting here. Like I said, it's a perfect storm for people who aren't organised, planning, forecasting, got systems, and really, really watching their cash flow and understanding the market to fail. It really is. It's kind of, I guess, a wake up to the industry, because you've also, in that perfect storm, got people who essentially paid to be on the dole. They could make more money some weeks being at home with the government handouts than what they could on the job. We haven't been able to import any skilled labour for the last 2 years.
That's the other issue going on at the moment, is the labour shortage, not just across construction, but most sectors and industries. It's phenomenal.
So, add all these factors into what was already a perfect storm, and you can see why there's a lack of trades, there's a lack of leadership, and there's a lack of businesses being able to survive all this. And so it's a shake-up for the industry, and I'm just about to step into a general manager role for a building company. Nothing like a challenge to do that in this kind of environment. And my job is to grow the business, essentially. So my job is to grow the business. And, I'm looking at what's happening and going, we need to innovate. We need to, as an industry collectively, not just our company, innovate and look at how we can do things differently. Construction has been a monolith of archaic practices and points of view for very, very many centuries now. And only since about 95, when the Workplace Health and Safety Act came in, and the Anti-Discrimination Act in 93, and then the anti-bullying laws and Fair Work, the construction industry, generally speaking, is still struggling to catch up with this stuff, because that's not how they've operated for a very long time. And so factor in this as well. What I think is also contributing to some of the problem is, if you've got old business practices, you've got older people who are very, very much used to the way things have always been, who aren't able to cope or necessarily, innovate, change, and react in a quicker, more timely fashion, and embrace some of the new technologies to support and help their business. So again, I think this is a real chance for the industry to kind of step back, take a really good look at itself, reassess how we operate, and do some really interesting, innovative things that might be more around, collaboration than competition. If we could actually get people to work together in this industry, a bit more of a cooperative kind of place, we could probably help lift each other up. Rising tide lifts all boats. But it's still a bit cutthroat out there, and I think that is contributing to some of the demise, because people are just going, what about me? And that's understandable from a human perspective, but I think from an industry perspective, we really, really are in a interesting transition. The crisis will pass eventually. It always does. People always need houses. We always need roads. We need everything construction provides. So it will continue. It's just what it looks like 5 or 10 years from now, I think, will look vastly different to what we've known for hundreds of years in that practice.
And so maybe just close out how you started out after that, helping that construction firm grow massively. Kind of what year did you move on from that, and when did you start up your own business?
So that was, I think I moved on from there about 2001.
Yep.
They'd kind of grown to a point where they needed people to be doers rather than innovators and sort of growth and development people like me. It took me a couple more years to probably recognize that skill that I had. So in about 2007, I was actually headhunted to go and do some project management with Queensland Rail, which is now split up and has got a couple of different names. Horizon, I think, is the inland rail network, which I helped build about 40 kilometres of rail on, and they actually only wanted consultants. So that almost forced me to start up my own business in order to go and work for them. And at the time, I kind of thought it was a temporary thing, but once I finished, I realised that I quite liked that freedom of being that consultant and having a bit more flexibility in terms of how I approach things and the way I was able to utilise all the skills in the role. We did some really innovative stuff on that project that Queensland Rail, as a network, Horizon, as it's now known, had never really seen in terms of systems, again. We had to work really strongly with their IT department. And again, we're talking about a company that's been operational for about 120 years, not commercially construction driven. And so there was a lot of upheaval. I tend to pick these roles where I'm a part of that change. And I've learned that I really, really love that. And so that's what really drove me to look at some of the smaller businesses, because we were building the rail in Mackay, which is halfway up the Queensland coast. And again, for those overseas, it's about a 10-hour to 12-hour drive from Brisbane, just to give you a bit of distance perspective if you did that at full speed in one run. So it's a long way. It's about 3,000 kilometres or something, I think. And so we were dealing with a lot of remote, smaller industries because it's not a big city. It's a rural farming sort of, almost a gateway into a holiday land. So there wasn't a lot of what you'd call talent pool up there. We're dealing with sort of mom and pop and businesses that had kind of, just had enough to kind of keep them going in their specialist field. And then all of a sudden we're throwing a $500 million project at this area and expecting people to kind of step up and be able to comply with rail regulations, transport regulations, safety regulations, when this is a rural area. They've never really had to be that involved, and they've never had to do checklists for everything like this project needed. And so in my role, it kind of went from project managing to almost a liaison in that regard, helping the construction team talk to the locals, get them used to and understanding and getting them comfortable with. And that's the role that I suppose really led me to go, there's a massive gap in the market.
Yep.
And as we know, the idea of being an entrepreneur is find the gap in the market that you're good at fixing and do that. And so that's what really opened my eyes to this lack of knowledge and lack of access to knowledge. It's all well and good to say, oh, go on the site, WorkSafe site, it's all there. Well, yes, it is. But if you don't understand it, if you don't have some basic knowledge around it, it's just gibberish.
Yes.
And it's very much, it's legislation. So it's not designed to tell you what to do. It's designed to tell you what the outcome needs to be.
Yep.
And so if you've never worked towards that outcome, it's very hard to, well, what do I do? And we all know that government and that sort of thing won't necessarily tell you how to do it, because then they can be held responsible.
Yep.
So, it's all about risk averse and moving liability on. So, so that's sort of the market since 2007, 2008. I've been, I suppose, actively working in and supporting smaller businesses. And I've had a couple of other smaller businesses that I've helped grow. I was a GM in Northern Territory for 2 years for a small Indigenous company based in New South Wales, and we doubled their turnover in a year and a half. And became the highest growth state they had seen, and they've been operating for about 10 years. So, it's something I love doing. I've realised I'm much better at making money for other people than I am myself, which is a great skill to know. Not so great for me personally as an entrepreneur, though. It's been an interesting career.
So any other key numbers on growth, maybe on that construction firm you work with, number of full-time team members they started with to where they ended up with when you finished?
Well, including me, who wasn't full-time when they put me in there. There were 3 in the office and 2 site supervisors. So that was their full-time staff.
Yeah.
Everyone else was a subcontractor or a part-time employee. And we went in that space of that year and a half, we went to, let me do the math. We went to 9 full-time employees in the office, including myself. And we had 5 or 6 crews running. It's been a while. So we had 5 or 6 supervisors. I think we might have had 6 supervisors, but only 5 crews, and we used one as a, sort of a support and a floater across the others. And we had some full-time staff under that. So we actually started hiring full-time labourers rather than sort of part-time or labour hire. So we went to somewhere in the high 30s from memory.
Right.
37 seems to be coming to mind, but it was high 30s in that space. So rapid growth. Yeah. And of course, all these people need safety inductions and HR management. And it was an intense time.
When was the moment you felt like you had succeeded?
In that role, I didn't feel like I'd succeeded probably till a couple of years after I'd left it. I was going through some interesting personal development. Like, I'd left my fiance. I was doing coaching to kind of learn a bit more about NLP and the way I talk to myself and the way I talk to others. And so I didn't leave that job thinking I'd been successful, put it that way. Yeah. Which is hard to understand when I throw these figures at you. But it took me probably a year and a half to 2 years to really kind of take some time out, reflect back, and acknowledge what I'd actually achieved there for myself and come to that recognition.
What does success look like to you?
Success? Oh, that's a tough question for early in the morning. Success looks like doing a job well and being satisfied with the outcome, knowing that the person you're doing it for or with is also in that same space.
Yeah. Number one thing you'd recommend to marketing a fast-growing business?
Oh, plan it. Plan it and measure it. Measure and monitor. I can't stress enough to so many people, you can't measure something you're not monitoring. You can't monitor something you're not measuring. They go hand in hand. Yep. Even if it's just set yourself some KPIs, you want 20 responses from this ad. If you don't get 20 responses, it doesn't mean you failed, but it means you've measured, so you can compare it against what else is happening and see what works best, and maybe realize that 20 is a much greater number than you're ever going to achieve.
Yep.
And so, you can't, one of the I suppose the mistakes I constantly see is people just throw things at the wall and hope they stick.
Yes.
Instead of having, okay, let's try this plan. Let's try it for 6 months and gather the data. Let's assess what's working well, what's not working well, what is mediocre. Let's get some feedback on that 6 months and then alter the plan based on that feedback to improve. And that is a continuous improvement cycle. But people want to overcomplicate it. Or they don't want to go through that sort of measurement because people don't like to discuss and measure failure. And so they just throw some more stuff at the wall.
Yeah.
So that's probably my biggest piece of advice. Have a plan, make sure you can measure and monitor it.
Love that saying, what can be measured can be managed.
Yes, perfect.
And how did you fund your business?
I was earning a great hourly rate back in the boom days when I was with QR and first started up my business. So I had a nice little nest egg, I suppose, that I could use to fund. Also, I didn't need a lot of funding in terms of outlay. I didn't need to market. I had an industry reputation, word of mouth. And back then, that was much easier to do because, again, we're talking about a boom situation as opposed to sort of what we've been in the last couple of years. I also had a couple of jobs lined up. Like, there were people coming to me going, can you do this? I need you to do that. So I could actually be a bit discerning and turn work away, which was kind of an amazing innovation for me who'd never turned down anything previous to that. So I don't need a lot to run the company because it's my skill, it's my experience of 30 years, and there's not too much more to it than that.
Yeah. If you were to start up today with plenty of funding, would you go into your industry?
If I had, so if I had plenty of funding, would I go into the same industry?
Yeah.
Not at the moment, no. Simply because of the conditions that are currently in the market.
Yeah.
If the situation wasn't quite where it is now, then yes, definitely. I love construction. There's so much scope. There's so many different varieties. There's so much specialization. Yeah, I would. I absolutely would stay in the industry.
Can you outline the most stressful point in your small business growth journey so our audience can learn from it?
Oh, only one.
Only one.
Okay, this is a brilliant one. So this is the young Indigenous company that I worked for as a consultant initially. I went up there for 3 months to help them out, get them started, kick off a project, and they're working in the defence space. So, unbeknownst to me, defence has got its own quirks over and above anywhere else I've worked for. The 2 people who were in the company had left, so there was no legacy of knowledge. And the tender had been given to the company, I won't say illegally, but it was problematic because we were supposed to have a certain certification called FSC, which is a federal safety certification, in order to be able to spend this much money on behalf of the government. And the company didn't have that. So I didn't know any of this until I got up there, had the first meeting with the client, which is defence representative, and got pretty much blasted for non-activity, non-action. And I'm sitting there kind of going, there was nothing right with this situation.
Yep.
And so from that, I then kind of negotiated, well, you're going to need me for longer than 3 months because I'm only just going to start to, deal with some of the issues in that length of time. Your client's already unhappy, so if you change out again, you can kind of kiss this goodbye in a big way. And also too, by then I kind of looked at the market for personnel in Darwin and sort of found there wasn't a lot of scope. Darwin is it's a capital city for those who are overseas, but it's still a very small rural town because it's so remote. To give you an idea, there's 120,000 people who live there.
Yep.
And for a capital city, that's quite small. And so that's the pool of talent I'm looking at. And plus, being in defence base, most people are working in defence. So trying to find the right skill up there was also problematic. So I kind of negotiated a longer tenure, which ended up being nearly 2 years. That was not expected. And oh my God, I had to basically review the entire tender from scratch. I had to recost it. So this was a fire systems tender, which is installing fire alarms, installing fire warning systems, installing fire hydrants, fire hoses, and that was across 4 different bases. So it wasn't just one building. It was basically something like 650 buildings across the Northern Territory sort of area. Then I found out that there was heritage listed buildings, which again, for those who don't know that, there are massive regulations about what you can and can't do in a heritage listed building. And some of that includes not being able to attach anything to walls or ceilings, which you need to do for fire alarms. Then when I was going through the tender and getting my head around all these different activities, I found out there are lots of duplicates. So the tender had been let very poorly. So out of 835 odd line items, there was about 120 duplicates. So the company had put a tender in and charged twice for items. Now, this is where some of the conflict came in, because obviously the company was given some poor press for not pointing that out during the tender process. I'm a fairly assertive individual, so I pushed back and kind of went, well, maybe you could take a look in the mirror and go, you guys put that tender out. And they only have 3 or 4 weeks to do this. So, there's not a lot of reconciliation going on. There's a lot of scrambling. First couple of months was very, I won't say aggressive, but it kind of got to that point. I was throwing the contract at them because I'm very much, all about the contract, read the contract, know it better than the client. And I did, because I'd worked in that space for a lot longer. So that combine that with, on the client side, very young engineers with not a lot of experience. So I was kind of able to run circles around them. And I must admit, I did that as a bit of a power play for the first couple of months because I needed to establish some authority. I needed them to actually listen to the problems because I wasn't going to be able to solve it myself. There was no way I could fix this tender. There was no way I could double bill. That's a fraudulent process, and we're talking about, federal money.
Yeah.
So I needed them to kind of come to the party. So there was a lot of contract play and argy-bargy, and there might have been one or two screaming matches. And I can yell pretty loud too. So finally, they actually managed to get the attention of someone more senior, which is the first thing that needed to happen. Then we kind of sat down, had a round table, and when I went through exactly, they were appalled. Well, thank you for now getting where I'm sitting. And so then I spent the next 3 months actually revaluing the contract. So they kind of went, okay, you've been given 8.9 million. That's the sum we're approved. And the thing is, with defence projects, you don't give the money back. You need to spend it because that's their budget, and there's this whole behind the scenes stuff that happens that if you don't spend it causes chaos. So they kind of went, okay, you've got that much money, revalue everything, basically redo the tender pricing, coming to that budget, or as close as you can get it, and then we'll see what happens, whether you're above or over. And so, so while trying to get some of the work done, so don't think that we didn't do any work during that. We still had to facilitate this tender and actually construct. So we had to find works that we could do and bill for. I had to revalue all the stuff that needed revaluing. And another example of that is we had 2-story stairs off a heritage building that someone had put $2,500 pricing against. Anyone who knows stairs knows that you're not building any stairs in a 2-story house for $2,500, let alone attaching it to a heritage listed frame. Exactly. So, it's fun. In the meantime, it had also come to their attention that we didn't have the compliance level of this FSC, this Federal Safety Certificate, to conduct the contract either. So as well as all that, I had to create the safety system and get it certified for this company. And the company didn't have the resources to help in any way. So I didn't sleep for, I think, probably the first 9 months of that contract.
Wow.
Every waking hour was systems, tendering. I had nightmares of spreadsheets for months. In fact, I still do. Every now and then they pop up in my dreams and chase me. I had 3 screens and folders on the weekend trying to reconcile the actual construction drawing to the tender briefing, to the scope of works, because some of those were inconsistent too. And it was the biggest nightmare I've ever been involved in for less than a $10 million project. And one of the things I learned with that is it's actually easier to do a $100 million project than it is a $10 million project. Yep. Because you have more resources thrown at a $100 million project. $10 million project, off you go, get it done. So that was fun. I actually imported my husband up there, who's a safety expert.
Yep.
Because I kind of went, well, I'm not coming home in 3 months. So you've got 2 options. Don't see me ever, because I can't do anything but this, or come up and help me with the safety system, which he did. And so that was, we convinced ourselves of working holiday. There was no holiday. I think we got to fly over Kakadu at the last month, just before we left. Anyway, met some great people, had some great time. It's a beautiful place. But yeah, the challenge of that was just almost beyond my capabilities. And I think I'm a pretty capable person. It used every skill I'd ever learned. I had to teach some of these subcontractors how to do, as constructed drawings. We call red lines, as built, which is how you've built it at the end. They, there are subcontractors up there who didn't know what that was. So yeah, massive challenge. Even talking about it, I'm like, wow. And my thing is that I was successful.
Yep.
We got through all this. We ended up with great relationships with the department. We got accolades from defence, and as they say, no good deed goes unpunished. We did so well. We got the biggest ever variation to contract defences ever signed off ever in the history of ever, and they gave us another $10 million worth of work to do.
Oh, well done. Congratulations.
You'd think, but I'm like, I'm not sure that's a reward, hey. But yeah, look, it was great for the company. It was great for our PR, great for where we'd started. everything about it was great. I just kind of went, okay, I'm done. You need to find someone else to do that part of the work.
I can imagine.
Yeah, I was pretty much broken. I think I came back to Queensland and slept for 6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What area in business do you feel you've had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
Politics. The political and unspoken cultural requirements to fit in and get what you want done. I've never been good at that. I'm pretty blunt. I'm pretty outspoken. I call it how I see it. Some places that's okay, but when you get to places like defence, Queensland Rail, big sort of federal government unionised conglomerates, that's not how they operate. And so that's been an interesting journey for me to learn how to navigate and soften. And one of my greatest skills that came out of that is encouraging people to believe that the idea that I dropped in their mind
was there.
That's right. They come back 4 weeks later and go, oh my God, let's do this. I'm like, that's fantastic. You're so smart. Brilliant. And not sound sarcastic when I do that. And learn to accept that that's just how it is and I'm not going to get the credit, but what I am going to get is the outcome. So, yeah, that's been my biggest challenge and journey so far. And I'm still practicing that on a regular basis.
What have you enjoyed the least about managing fast growth?
The least, I don't really have time to stop and whinge. But what have I enjoyed the least? The pressure.
Yeah.
Fast growth is chaotic. It's dynamic.
That would have been frenetic, going from 70 grand a month to 10 million in less than 2 years.
It was absolutely crazy. And, about 8 months in, I was a grump. The guys are actually thinking about sacking me and hired someone else. She spent a week with me and went, don't you dare get rid of her. The amount of work she does is ridiculous. I'm not going to do all that. I'm only going to do one thing. You need her. And they actually came back and was kind of like, oh, is that why you've been cranky? I'm like, well, probably. And that was a really good lesson too, to learn to ask for help, put my hand up and not kind of go, I have to do it all. It's all on me. I learned from that 3 months earlier, I should have said, I need someone and I need someone qualified.
Yeah.
Because who they gave me originally, and this might have contributed to it. I've got great stories. Who they gave me originally was one of the 2 engineers in charge, his girlfriend.
Oh, right. Totally underqualified.
Yeah. Oh, funny. How did you know that? Yeah, no skills whatsoever. Oh, just teach her. I'm like, well, that's not really saving time. And then, of course, after they broke up, guess who get to sack her?
Yeah.
And that was my first sacking. I'd hired people before, really confident with that now. Sacking someone, let alone the boss's ex-girlfriend, who was in her own space of what she was going through. Yeah, that was. I actually Googled how did you sack someone and did some research. I was so nervous, I threw up because I'd just text it, get her out by the end of the day. I'm like, I might have said them. Well, actually, I might have said them stronger words than that. Like,
it's the hardest thing I've ever had to do in business is moving people on because, well, as the business owner, you're ultimately responsible for that failure because you've either hired the wrong person that can't be trained and coached into the role that's needed, or you've got the right person in, but you haven't supported them to hit success. So it's a terrible thing to have to do. And yeah,
it is. I agree. I hate it. It's one of the worst to this day. I do not like it. Yeah. And you're right. I kind of feel that sometimes it's a failure on behalf of the company, not the person. And that's even harder to do. It's like, it's not you, it's actually us, but it's not working and we're not going to change, we the company. And having to be that messenger when you know that if they just change, it could work is it's a sticky place. But yeah.
What do you love most about growing a small business?
Oh, the challenge, the outcome, seeing it from there to where it is, watching the people grow, watching people actually start to enjoy their job. I actually love the whole process, really. Which is why it's really hard to come up with something I hate about it. During the process, there's days where you're like, oh, kill me. But when you get to that kind of point of growth, or you get to that completion of the project and you kind of see what else has been facilitated as a result, it's the most satisfying moment ever.
What's been the biggest mindset shift for you in your small business growth journey?
Allowing others to take credit for ideas I've given them. And not being that egocentric, but that was my idea. I told you that it's not fair that you're coming back and saying it and you get the credit and the awards. And I've had that. I've had people win awards for ideas that I gave them.
Yeah.
And they kind of go, oh yeah, you might have mentioned something. I was like, that's fine. I hope you enjoy your shiny thing. That's probably been the hardest. I like shiny things too. I like to be thanked for my input. I do like to be recognized. We're all human. We all do. So learning how to let that go and focus on the outcome being the important thing rather than the ego recognition that took me a long while to get my head around.
Yeah. The number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
The number one habit, monitor. Back to that measure and monitor. Know your figures, know your contracts. Whatever it is you do, know it. And I think, yes, this is probably my advice. Know it better than the person you're doing it for.
Yep.
So if you're in construction, know your contracts better than the people who gave you the contracts. If you're in marketing, know your market and know the skills you need better than the people coming to you, because that's why they're coming to you. So know what it is you do better than anyone else is probably my recipe for success. And then measure and monitor. Don't forget that.
Find it hard to define a clear strategy, then communicate it and execute it alongside the rest of your team? Or you currently don't work a simple quarterly strategic plan to boost your team's performance? Our Business Growth Formula online course is perfect for small business owners with 5 to 30 team members wanting to grow. We share the mindsets, habits and tools to be a legendary leader in your business. growsmallbusiness.com.
Can you talk to how you've added people to the team, some wins, mistakes and advice for those listening?
Well, there's the girlfriend story there. How I've added people to the team. Okay, I like to look for people with sort of hidden skills, the hidden gem. There have been 3 young men I've hired on 3 different projects who failed the rest of the panel, to put it bluntly.
Yep.
No one liked them. They didn't see potential. They thought they were either kind of too slow, couldn't articulate what they did well enough, not the right fit, all that sort of thing. And I'm like, I see something. Give me 6 months to work with them. And the first young gentleman, he was a bit possibly spectrum. He had a hearing disorder.
Yep.
And so recognizing that and working with that and learning how to get his attention was a big part of actually his growth. He was a very patient, methodical young man, which I'm not in some ways. Like, I like systems, but don't ask me to explain them over and over again, because I'm like, I told you once, write it down, figure it out.
Yeah.
I'm very much in that creator, leadership space, but he had that skill and I didn't have it. So I saw that in him and kind of went, he's going to be perfect for the repetition and the training in this particular system this project used over and over again, because he has the patience and tolerance for that. It's exactly his skill set.
Yep.
And he went on to actually become the senior manager for that whole system in the Australia-wide company.
Great.
Yeah, and no one else wanted to hire him. So that's how I like to roll. Another young gentleman, very smart, one of those kind of, I don't know how I did it, I just did it and it worked. And I kind of recognize that. I'm a bit like that myself. It's like, how did you do that? I don't know. I just made sure I got it done. And so he couldn't articulate processes, and he was a SharePoint developer. This is the QR role. And because he couldn't articulate like how he came up with the process, they didn't want to hire him. I'm like, no, he got the outcome. Okay. He just doesn't have the language. He doesn't understand what a flow chart is, or a process chart is, or a Gantt chart is. He doesn't have that language because he's 22, but he can do it because he's done it. And I can see that evidence. So let's give him a crack. Again, I was right. As soon as he was taught the language, he just great guns. He's now a director of somewhere doing something or other. And so that's what I love too. That's a part of watching, teams grow and hiring those people and then seeing 10, 15, 20 years later where they are and going, you know what? They got that job from me. And they might not recognize that or realize that, but I can feel very proud of kickstarting their journey to get them to that place. So, yeah.
What are some things you recommend to building a sustainable and kick-ass culture to help with the growth?
Ooh, sustainable and kick-ass culture. Communication. The Darwin job, I had supervisors come to me and go, I've never been as informed on a project as what you are. You know, making me come to meetings and telling me what's going on is actually helping me do my job. And I've never realized that no one else did this until you did. Having people's back, another project, I had very senior welding inspectors. And if anyone knows anything about welding, they're kind of, well, I'd say next to God, but they'd say they're above God. This is a joke. What's the difference between God and a welder? God doesn't think he's a welder. So, so very sick. Like, this dude was known worldwide, and he was on my team, subordinate to me. And he came to me one day and he was like, Beck, you're the best boss I've ever had. Okay, that's random and weird. He goes, no, some of the blokes have been giving me a hard time. Girl boss, ha, ha, ha. And I've actually, like, put it up them and gone, no, she's actually the best. She cares. She communicates. She checks in with us, and she's got our back. Like, we go to her with a problem, she fixes it, and we can trust her. I've never had it. And he said, I've never had a boss that's done that I could trust have my back.
Yes.
Wow, that was huge for me, really huge. And so that's something I've taken with me as well. It's like, if you cock it up, tell me first. Don't hide it. Don't wait for someone else. Get on the phone. I will cover your ass. I will work with you to fix it, and I will manage it with the client. And that was an interesting lesson for some of the guys up in Darwin. They didn't do that the first time, and the client found out, and they got reamed, and it turned into a great big kerfuffle, and they had to do all this extra work. And I have discovered that my favorite 4 words are, I told you so. And so I use that, and it's like, oh, I don't like that. So I'm like, well, what did I tell you when we started? If you'd called me, none of that would have happened. So next time, give it a go. Sure enough, he actually did. We fixed it. We'd actually come up with a solution before the client got to me. And I'm like, oh, yep, that's been done. We've done this, this, and this. And like, oh, so it's not even an issue. I'm like, nope. And they could see the difference. And so being that authentically and consistently with communication, I think, is the biggest and best way to build team culture.
Yeah, it's one of my sayings, communication is the key to any relationship.
Sure is.
Now, this chestnut, perfect for you. Tell our audience how you've handled balance.
I haven't. That's the short answer. I haven't. I am terrible at balance. In fact, I don't even know that balance exists. You know, we kind of have this idea of balance, and, you know, I get up and I have a cup of tea and I do yoga in the morning and make myself a healthy breakfast and healthy lunch, and then go to work and, you know, swim through the day feeling all zen and achieving, and come home and hug my children. I don't have children, I have dogs. But, you know, like, we have this ideal that that's what balance looks like, and it's bullshit. Balance doesn't really exist in terms of work-life balance. You know, we do 8 hours of play, 8 hours of work, 8 hours of sleep. Bullshit, we do. And we're never going to. Balance for me is being satisfied with the overall picture I have, whether that's 60 hours or 80 hours on the job, whether that's, you know, sleeping in on a Saturday because, you know, once a year I get to do that. Whatever life I'm building, if I'm happy with it, it completes me, and I'm well rested, well fed, maintaining my health, and believe me, I have failed in that a lot, then I think that's what balance looks like. And that could be 20 hours a week for an entrepreneur. It could be 120 hours a week, as I was doing in Darwin. Now, I wasn't balanced, but I was satisfied with the outcome. My health suffered as a result of that, and that's a lifelong lesson for me. I throw myself into things fully, and, you know, I'll sit at a desk for 4 hours and not really think about it because I'm so immersed in what I'm doing. I'll get up and move, and my bones go, we're frozen here. This is how we look from now on. And then kind of, you know, the rest of nature calls. You haven't had any water for that long. You need food. So it's a constant practice of seeking that balance. And I think that's all we can hope for, is have an idea of what balance looks like for us and what we want out of life, and keep aiming for that as we go through.
How much professional development have you invested in yourself over the years?
Oh my God, so much. To the point where now I'm kind of, oh, I need to do something different. I've spent over 100,000 on coaching in that space to learn how to, deal better with men, have better conversations, communicate better. I've spent more money after my degree on project management and quality assurance. I've done personal development, which I also think actually realistically helps professional development. I did a stand-up comedy course.
Wow.
Most terrifying moment of my life was actually having to go, because they tell you when you signed up for the course, and I do these things. Oh, that sounds fun. Let's do that. Sign up, and then go, crap. So we had to do a 5-minute skit live in a comedy tavern where the world had been invited. So I was like, oh no, I just wanted to learn how to be funny. So that's like, I've gone toe to toe with big Maori Samoan boys on site who don't like what I have to say. Never been as terrified as stepping out trying to be funny for 5 minutes. But again, great growth. I do consider that part of professional development, because I can now get on stage, talk about anything, come up with anything. I'm kind of naturally funny, I've discovered. So great for confidence building in that sort of arena. I've got other qualifications. I'm currently trying to do an editing and a writing course. One of those things like, oh, COVID, I'll do a course, and then of course not doing it. And that's great for like report writing and stuff like that. But it's also, I suppose, the second part of where I'm moving into, and then I've written a book. It's an anthology, and I contribute to anthologies around the world, and I write for a couple of magazines. There's a train magazine, there's a women's business magazine, and what else? What's the third one? I can't remember. Learning to, I've always been writing in my career. So I'm kind of looking at honing that skill as something a bit different and not quite in that engineering construction framework. So I'm always doing professional development.
Have you mentioned coaches? Have you had mentors along the way?
I have. I've had mentors probably before that word was kind of a buzzword and a thing. One of my first jobs, I was drafting. And, the guys kind of would pull me aside and go, hey, Beck, you know how you kind of do this? We just want to give you some feedback and kind of go, maybe if you didn't do that, maybe you did this. When I was working on the G3 project, which is the $1.4 billion project doing QA, that was an aluminium expansion. The risk facilitators that were brought in actually took me under their wing and gave me a lot of risk knowledge and really, really mentored me in that. So I've had a lot of mentors. I've had a lot of really amazing gentlemen see my skill and give me more knowledge and allow me to grow in that space. We never really formalized it with, he's my mentor or anything like that. It was just what they did and what I accepted, and was eternally grateful for. So these days, I don't necessarily. I'm about to step into a role where I might think about it again, because it's a little bit different to what I've done, and it's a lot higher, as I said, general manager. So I might have a look, but to be honest, as a female with 30 years in the industry, there's not a lot of women out there that I could grab who've been there and done what I've done.
Yeah.
There's a lot of men, but I find it really interesting, and I mentor formally. So I give back as a mentor, and I have for 15 years now. I find it really interesting. There's very few men out there who label themselves mentors and actually give that sort of feedback to the industry and give back in that way, which I think is a bit sad, because there are so many skills out there that could be passed on. And I think the guys are suffering a little bit, because there's all these programs for mentoring for women, and I'm involved in several, particularly in building and construction. There's no formal programs for the guys out there where they sign up and they get a mentor and it's matched and it's managed for a year. And I think that's a real gap in the industry that I think should change too.
Totally agree. All right, Becky, you want to do our final 5 questions. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
hardest thing growing a small business, finding the right people.
Yep. Favorite business book which has helped you the most?
Ooh, so many. I kind of want to say Richard Branson because I read him very early back in the day where he was a thing. But I want to do an interesting one that probably most people wouldn't consider is Arnold Schwarzenegger's bio, Total Recall. Yeah. That dude is an amazing businessman, which no one really knows because Terminator, Muscles, I'll Be Back. But when you read his bio, he was a successful businessman before he made it into the movies.
Right.
Very innovative and has continued in that space. And I kind of like the fact that he doesn't brag about it. It's not it's not a big part of what's known, but he just the dude's a real estate mogul. When he first came over, he has got some phenomenal business advice in his bio. So I totally recommend that as a read.
Any great podcasts or online learning tools you use for your own professional development?
Do you know I have been on so many podcasts as a guest. I don't listen to them. I'm a you can see a book. I read. I'm not an audio person, so podcasts kind of don't work for me. I'm a ask me about books, I can give you 1,000 podcasts. There's so many out there, and I think just pick one and start going. I'm pretty sure yours would be really, really useful to new business owners. So let's do yours.
Thank you. Yeah. One tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business?
Ooh, only one?
Yeah. You can throw a couple in there.
Okay. Now, when you say tool, that's not an attribute, is it? Because I kind of want to say consistency.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Do the same thing over and over again builds habits.
Yep.
Forming habits builds success, builds excellence. Consistency is, and also you save time. You're not trying to reinvent wheels every day or remember how you did it or what you did or who did when. Consistency.
Yep. Oh, that's a good one. I've done that before, but that is certainly a good tool. Finally, my favorite question: what would you tell yourself on day one of starting out?
Fuck. just that.
Yeah.
What would I tell myself on day one? I am torn between seriously fucking run.
Yep.
And and you know what? In 30 years, you're going to be so fucking glad you did this.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of at those extremes of air punching, yeah, go girl, and oh, holy crap, if you knew what you were in for, just get out now. Which I think is probably true for every business.
Yes.
If you think back, yeah.
Well, thanks very much for your time today, Becky. I think the audience got a lot of value out of it and a very entertaining journey that you've had and phenomenal growth. That construction firm, 70 grand a month at 10 million in less than 2 years. Well done on all your achievements.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I feel like Elvis. I just channeled a bit of Elvis there. No, I love sharing these stories, and this is a part of mentoring and giving back. So thank you for the platform to do that. It's been great chatting and reliving some of my memories and reminding myself how fabulous I am.
That's it.
And for our audience, we would greatly appreciate a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. More reviews means we bubble up higher in iTunes, etc. So more business owners looking for podcast help with their growth will find us.